Oh no, it's loading. Do things. All right, we're here.
It's probably live.
Yeah. All right, so welcome everybody to episode 13 of the Justin and
Caitlin show.
Hey, today we're talking about disorganized attachment. This is actually already episode 4 in our attachment series. The first one was a basic overview, and we have just methodically walked through the attachment styles, starting with ambivalent, avoidant. Tonight is disorganized. Next week, we will talk about secure and earn secure attachment, which if you identify with any either tonight or the past 2 weeks, your healing journey, some clues will be given next week. And depending on some feedback here by you, the viewer, we may add in a bonus because we're going to end this on next week with secure attachment. But we may add a bonus video on attachment and sex. So if you would be interested in that, drop us a comment or send us a message and let us know. We got people out here tonight, people saying hi. That's cool. Hey, man, just being honest, those of you who are watching with the kiddos, or if you end up not watching us live, but you end up watching us later and typically have your kids roaming around, this is probably not going to be a show you want the little birds listening in. We're going to be talking about things like incest, molestation, physical abuse that's intense, and just quite honestly topics that aren't, little kid friendly in this. So if that's you right now, I just would suggest hitting the pause button. Check us out later or post on our Facebook page. But just a little warning and heads up.
And this is such a sensitive topic right now because it is so relevant today, especially with COVID and having to be quarantined. The kids not being able to go back to school. Apparently now they are going back to school. But just all these months with being at home, there has been, again, very overwhelming emotions where anger, frustration, anxiety, fear, people are losing their jobs, their homes. And with this being such a tough time, what we have seen, though, is an increase in violence, where people don't really know how to deal with it. And unfortunately, a lot of kids have taken the brunt of that effect. And so, again, very relevant conversation today. We've seen an increase in domestic violence and abuse and also human trafficking. And I know Justin's going to get into a lot of different types of abuse later and how this is playing out, especially right now. But we've seen a lot more parents having trouble paying rent. And unfortunately, one of the ways they've chosen to find money for rent has been selling their children. So again, this topic, guys, today is a little bit tougher to hear. And I mean, even some of Justin's examples later, we talked through them a little bit before here. And they are hard to talk about. And so please take care of yourself during this. If it is pausing, even if there's no kiddos around, if you have to pause and listen to it a little bit later or take it in chunks, do that. Again, your mental health and self-care is the priority here. And so.
Yep. No, that's a good point. There's no, this is going to get posted. So if you need to watch this in little chunks, it's cool. Also, again, just been giving us warning every week. So I'm going to continue consistency because that's important with attachment. Those of you who are parents, be aware this is going to have a double whammy effect because you're going to probably notice one of these episodes has hit home for you. But then you're going to realize you have a kid that you have passed some things on to. So I call that a double whammy effect. I'm sure there's some real fancy psychodynamic term for that, but that's what I call it. And just be aware, have grace and compassion for yourself. No one does parenting perfect in this stuff. It's awesome that you're here to learn because that means it's healable and workable. So Caitlin, why don't you kick this show off for real, and walk us down the road here of what is the big fear and what are the core beliefs of someone who has a disorganized attachment style?
Yeah, so if we go through again the 2 questions for attachment. First question is, do I believe I'm worthy of being loved? For disorganized attachment, the answer here is no. With the amount of abuse and neglect that they endured, that did get internalized, where it's like, okay, what is wrong with me that I am not worthy of being loved? The second question is, again, do I trust others to love me? And when Justin gets into this later with what the living environment was like growing up, the answer here is no as well. And so before with avoid and ambivalent, we had at least one yes in there. For disorganized, unfortunately, again, there was so much going on The answer is no for both of them. And so the biggest fear here isn't like an aspect of a relationship or a commitment. It's actually the relationship itself. There was no safe haven for these kids growing up. We are wired for connection. We are built to have relationships. And as children, we are built to have those relationships with our parents, and our parents be that safe haven, or either home be that safe haven. And for these kiddos, there wasn't one. And so, Jess, I know you're going to dive into more of, again, what that home life actually looked like growing up for them and how that protection wasn't really there.
Yeah. The key here to remember is you may do research and look up disorganized attachment and see they can also call it chaotic attachment. The big thing to remember here is the parents were the source of this horrible abuse, but because of how we're wired, they were supposed to be the solution to the abuse. So the kid is left in this horrific situation of, you are the one causing this immense pain and horrific situation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm supposed to come to you to either cry or crawl up in your arms, but you're literally the one that just broke my finger or broke my nose, or I watched you hit, mom or dad, or however that would work. And that is something to keep in mind here. And the idea here is if you have a friend, loved one, or somebody, to have compassion and empathy, because remember, this all forms, attachment forms when you're a kid.
Yeah.
Really by age 3, it's kind of locked in. Now it's changeable, but that's where it's learned by. Just being honest, this can look, you may hear people say, well, parents I'm talking about, you may hear them say, well, it doesn't matter. I gave them food, water, and shelter. I gave them what they needed. And this was said to me a couple years ago by one of my mentors. And he said, well, congratulations. That was an orphanage. That hit me like a sack of bricks. But it was honest, because what really kids, toddlers, babies, and honestly even in adolescence, even in adulthood, that emotional bonding and connection, those emotional needs, the affection is so needed, but it is so not given. And it's like, we just gave you basic needs. And one of the harsh realities is realizing, you think about an orphanage. Usually they're not well staffed. There's a lot of babies and kids. And so they are just given these bare necessities to literally survive. Food, water, shelter, diapers, all the things. So think about this. These people have also been exposed to really horrific physical violence, typically, or abuse. I've read and heard stories of people breaking babies' fingers, putting out cigarette butts, twisting and pinching their genitals, and doing things that are horrific, leaving them in diapers that are full of feces and urine for days, maybe even weeks. And that obviously breaks down the skin, causes a rash, which then gets infected. Stories of just kids where their parent would take their finger and pop it, break it, and coming into things too where the kid is unfortunately witness to mom and dad getting very chippy and then leading to rumbles. Physical violence. Caitlin mentioned domestic violence earlier. Addiction, families who are in addiction, if one or both of the parents is dealing with whether it's alcohol or some kind of drug, usually there's abuse tied in there. Here's one, again, if you got kids, shut down the laptop for a sec. Something to be aware of that occurs more often than probably many people want to acknowledge, and Caitlin alluded to this. What can happen, and this can be, dads are usually culprits that we identify, but this is also moms and stepmoms, dads and stepdads. When one of the spouses go to sleep, the other one has a tendency to slip into one of the kids' rooms and sexually molest them, rape them. and do horrific things. And it happens, unfortunately, on a regular basis where it almost becomes a ritual. And we'll talk about patterns and why these patterns repeat a little later in the show here. But think about sleeping and patterns for us as we've gotten older. You know, if you have a job, you got to be there at 9. You're like, all right, I got to be asleep by 11 to get my sleep, to get the kids ready. So you have a pattern of when you go to sleep. Well, that kid starts realizing, oh no, my parents go to bed at 11. That means, if we're just using an example, if the dad's a perpetrator here, it could be the other. Mom's going to be asleep by 11. That means at 11:05, dad's always creeping in my door, starts touching me, and things happen. And it becomes very ritualistic. You can just, I feel even myself feeling kind of like tense thinking about what it's like as a kid waiting when you see the clock ticking, 11:02, 11:03. You hear the footsteps coming your way, 11:04. 11:05, the door opens, and now here we are. You know, and that is called incest. When it's family member to family member, that's called incest. This can also be with uncles and aunts and on all the things. There's a lot of people that can fit these roles. I'm trying to keep this as simple, and you know, we could really jump into a lot of really easily. But these are the situations that create it because the parents are the source of the abuse, but they're supposed to be the solution, the person, the entity that we crawl into their arms, that they say, it's going to be okay, I will take care of it. But they're the ones breaking your fingers. They're the ones sodomizing you, raping you, and all the things. So I know you wanted to jump into some stuff here, Caitlin, before we switched.
Yeah. I wanted to pinpoint, with us talking about disorganized attachment, there's, yes, a theme here of abuse, but for people that have this type of attachment style, there's also a theme of resiliency. The fact that after going through all this, that they are willing to engage in relationships, whether that be watching this, showing up to therapy, working with people, dating people, being friends with people, and even acknowledging family members and having that familiar relationship, that shows such strength and bravery that I feel like a lot of times doesn't get acknowledged as much when we talk about this type of attachment or we talk about abuse. There's so much focus on, wow, this is your past, this is the trauma. Yes, it occurred, but you are not your past.
Yeah.
And you have so much strength and resiliency to keep moving forward and to keep taking that next step and to keep waking up every single day, especially when this was the environment you grew up in with no safe haven. And so we both really just wanted to actually mention that. And for anyone having disorganized attachment, again, there's no shame here. There's no focusing on the past. Now it's, okay, what does this look like right now? How is this playing into your current relationships and your present? And then how can you heal? So your future isn't defined by this, and your future doesn't continue the same patterns. There is hope. No one's past has made them past healing. You are not
Hold on.
that event.
Say that again.
Repeating the word past twice. No one's past makes you past healing. It's not like healing's here or there's this level and you're up here and it's like, whoop, sorry, can't heal from that. That's not how this works. It is possible to heal, and there is always hope. And my brain's going there, so I'll just kind of follow it right now. During our Facebook Lives over the summer, one thing I talked about with the domestic violence and human trafficking was with how bad that abuse can be, with being in this situation. Again, there's that feeling of hopelessness. There's an amazing part, though, with nature, where there's that eternal renewal, where the sun always comes up, flowers always grow, the grass grows. Again, no matter how bad the darkness seems, and even listening to this, if this was your childhood and you feel hopeless, or it's bringing back a lot of memories, or it feels like there's a lot of darkness coming in, the sun always rises. There is always hope. There's always a way of healing. There we go. Thank you for making it sound a little more professional. Okay, so if we're diving into this, what does this look like for you now as an adult? Having disorganized attachment as one of the primary ones, what does this look like on a daily basis? A main aspect of this is dissociation. Again, dissociation, normal thing our brains do when we're children. It is a protective mechanism. Many times it is shamed when we're adults, but we're not shaming it here. This is a natural protective mechanism our brains use when we feel overwhelmed or when something is occurring, like abuse, that we don't know what to do with. We don't know how to handle it. This can feel like you're zoning out. This can feel like you're having a conversation with someone and suddenly you notice you're like on Saturn and they're still on Earth talking to you, but you are nowhere near that conversation. I do that a lot. I dissociate, which is funny because we'll compare how we have coped with certain things later. And for other people, they actually see themselves in the situation, but they're not present. So they can see themselves on the bed, but it's almost like they're on the ceiling looking down. And that was how their brain protected them, was kind of like almost removing them from the situation. And so part of healing is reconnecting that. And we'll dive into that a lot more next week with how that works. But for an example about how dissociation works on a daily basis. So a lot of my clients have been through sexual abuse. I myself have also been through sexual abuse. And so this was something I had to work through as well with this dissociation. So when you've been physically or sexually abused, often touch becomes something that is threatening. It's not safe. And so something as simple as someone touching your hand can naturally cause your brain to dissociate. When this happens, it is very, very easy for boundaries to be crossed. I'll talk to people all the time, and there's this question of, how did this happen? We didn't want to have sex. Or I wasn't planning on having sex with him that night or her that night. But it was like, they don't remember all of it. They're very confused on how they got there. It just kind of happened. But that's part of dissociation. It's the brain recognized the threat, and so it protected you. And that's where, as an adult, we have to figure out how to not dissociate all the time when that trigger happens or when those memories come up. But again, this is very normal for when our brain's trying to protect us. Now, some people, again, I dissociate. That was how I dealt with a lot of my own trauma. Justin had the exact opposite problem where his brain as a child didn't dissociate.
Yeah.
And so he did something very different.
Yeah, for me, because it was so unsafe and things were so chaotic and intense, I had to be hyper vigilant and on alert. So, I would guess here adding that it was maybe too unsafe to even dissociate. So I had to be on point so I could watch my dad. Literally, I'd freeze, watch him come at me, and just wait for the impact. But I would endure it. What happens with a lot of that, Caitlin's going to talk here in a minute about splitting the self. So think about the self is like that thing when people want to say, I want to self-actualize. I want to be totally me. As we've gone through life, we've split off little parts because they weren't accepted by those around us that loved us, or parents who said, that's stupid. I don't want you to do that. We're like, okay, I'm not doing that. Getting rid of that part. For me, one of my struggles of integration was that I would fragment certain things. Those of you who know me know I'm a food guy. So I use a pizza to extremely rudimentarily, I can't even say that word.
That's right.
So, a pizza has 8 slices, and that would be our quote unquote self to make this very easy. If one slice becomes so hurt, so wounded, filled with so much pain, we push that slice. So if you imagine you're at your dinner table, I don't know what y'all's table looks like, but you push it off to the furthest corner. It's not even connected to the pizza anymore. Splitting would be like just moving it away from those slices, but it's still in the box. It's still kind of there, but it's a little separated. Fragmenting, the pizza slice is literally on the other side. And that was me. I'm still integrating. Okay, I'm not some finished product. Shoot. But one of the hugest parts for me, and one of the things that makes me get teary-eyed, is like when I integrated my child part, because he was so horrifically wounded uh, that when it finally happened, and I could actually feel it happen, it was cool. It took so much extra work and energy because you think about if you're on a boat and you got that life preserver thing, the little red and white little buoy thing you're supposed to throw to somebody. It's attached to a rope. We cut the rope and we get rid of that part of ourselves because it's too painful to even engage. Now, integrating that, if you're somebody who you feel, man, that might have happened. Here's where you be compassionate to yourself in therapy. That is going to take longer to heal and integrate than someone who split. So be compassionate if you're like, dang, man, why is this taking so long? Man, this took me a while. I talk about these things, integrating the child. We're talking a couple of years at least. So be compassionate towards yourself in this process. And Kayla, you don't want to kind of continue this talking about a person's sense of self.
With disorganized attachment, again, the root of it is the abuse. The root of it is that feeling of lack of safety. There's no safe haven. And so usually as kids, we go to our parents to feel that acceptance, to know that, we're good enough, something's right with us, that if we like the color blue, that is great, and they accept it and they encourage it. With abuse and neglect, that's not always there. And so people with disorganized attachment often struggle to feel like they even know who they are. They may struggle to know if they like something, where they even like to eat, what they actually like to wear, who they like to be around. A lot of times you can almost feel like a chameleon in a sense, kind of changing who you are based upon the people that you're around. It can feel like sometimes you rapidly switch in different situations. Like one moment you feel like people walk all over you. Whatever they say, okay, that's what we do. And then the next situation, a few minutes later, you feel like you have to have control over everything to have that sense of safety. So again, both trying to get safety, one through appeasement, one through control. But it can feel very chaotic in your own mind as well with, okay, I just let him walk all over me, yet I want to control her. Well, that doesn't make any sense. And so again, there's a lot of sympathy here with probably the chaotic thoughts. It can feel like you're at war with yourself. And it's hard when you don't have that steady sense of, this is who I am. This is my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And so with even the fragmented selves and the trauma, when a moment like that gets triggered, it's easy to even start responding as if you were still in that traumatic situation and not with how you would actually want to respond. So let's say someone makes a comment. Instead of responding with how you would have a day later as you're thinking over the conversation, are like, oh, this is what I would have said. This makes perfect. Yeah, this is exactly what I'd want to say. You instead respond with that appeasement, or you respond through yelling, or you respond through throwing something at the wall, or you respond through shutting down. And again, that's due to the trauma. And so as you heal, you bring those parts together and you become more firm in what your identity is and who you are. And so part of this, again, is part of the healing is not creating the same cycle over and over again, which now Justin's going to get into of what does that look like when you have disorganized attachment.
Yeah. And if you fall into this attachment style, or somebody, or you're like, wow, this reminds me of my friend, or could be uncle, aunt, whoever. There is a strong pattern of trauma that keeps happening. You hear about like domestic violence and like keep going back to the abuser kind of thing. That's a real thing. What I want to add to this is there becomes an addiction to the trauma. And some people are like, wait a sec, are you serious? There's a chemical reason, and there's a reason that we've talked about in every episode. And I'll start with that, and I'll lead to the chemical part. Remember, everything you are born, the only thing you know how to do is cry and poop your pants and pee your pants. That's it. That's your baseline, and you want to be nurtured. Everything else becomes a learned mechanism. You're like a blank computer in your environment, which is usually your parents or your caretakers, grandma, grandpa, whoever. They provide the structure of how you're going to start viewing the world. Some of this, being honest, you can make the argument. I wouldn't disagree with you that it's not fair because you didn't have a choice. It was just something that was given to you.
Mm-hmm.
But if your world was so intense and chaotic, again, go back to the things I talked about earlier, where if a parent was sneaking into your room and molesting you nightly, if someone was breaking your fingers, putting out cigarette butts on you, just the emotional and psychological abuse, this becomes your norm. Now, logically, as an adult, you may sit here, if you're listening to this, going, well, that's not a good thing. I don't want that to be normal.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But remember, a kid's brain is not developed yet. That thing's only like a third through the baking process. So that chaoticness, that trauma, the rush that comes with that, adrenaline gets pushed out. There's chemicals that literally become addicting. They become something you want. I'll get to that in 1 minute.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes your norm. So to be calm feels threatening. So what they will do is want to create things. And this is subconscious. They're not walking around going, oh man, it's my lunch break. I've been pretty calm all morning. Let me cause a ruckus at the local restaurant. It's subconscious. It's things that are driven. These are why we come to therapy, because they're blind spots to us. Here's the chemical part. We hear about opioids a lot. Painkillers being a big issue right now. You know, where people are overdosing. Fentanyl. You've heard of Oxycontin and things. The brain has the ability, and I mispronounced it, but it has its own opioids that it releases that can literally have the hit at times of the same as morphine. So as you're going through this, that's where the addiction part of this trauma also comes in, because it's a literal chemical thing that's occurring in your brain. The adrenaline, the things, the chemicals that the brain releases, it saturates it. And it becomes a normal state. This is why with my clients, and they probably are ad nauseum and annoyed with me, I talk about they want to live their life in a Corvette. And what I'm trying to get them to drive is a Prius. You may not like the Prius, but the Prius does a really good job driving 45 miles an hour, which is where most of life goes. The Corvette likes stopping and hammering the gas pedal and going to 100, which is that 0 to 100 thing. Most of life is lived in the 45 mile an hour zone. Are there ups and downs? For sure. The hills and valleys are the scenery that creates scenery. But the hills and valleys don't need to be this big. The hills and valleys can also be this. But when what you've experienced has been this, you end up recreating that. And it becomes this addiction because of the chemicals that it releases in the brain. And it feels unsafe when things are calm, because so you're also waiting for the proverbial shoe to drop. Things have been going way too good. Something crappy is about to happen. And you start getting edgy, and that's where that adrenaline bath comes. And this is how this process keeps going. Man, I gotta say, I got kind of teary-eyed a few times doing this one. This one really
This one hit home.
hit the heartstrings. You know, and it's important to know. I know for me, when I first read the book, Why You Do the Things You Do, this was a chapter I hit home with. I was like, wow. It's important to remember, if you've been watching all our shows the past 3-4 weeks, you are a combination of these attachment styles. So there may be like a couple things you pick out from each. There's usually a primary one, and the rest kind of mix up to formulate. So it's not this cut and dry kind of thing. I also want to shout out some people. I mean, this is awesome. We've been getting a lot of comments, and I try and really focus on Caitlin. Those of you who know me know my attention span can go all over. Shout out to Danielle, Nikki, and Teresa. Thank you all for commenting. I've been seeing them. And Ermi as well. And I want to say thank you for commenting and sharing. I wasn't ignoring you on purpose per se. It's just I start typing, it looks weird, and then Caitlin's like, "You're not even listening to me."
And then we have a whole conversation after we get off, and it's just not good.
Here you go. So Ermi asks, "What is the book?" I don't know, this thing's weird. One day I'll get used to it. Why You Do the Things You Do by Tim Clinton and Gary Swinsley. Those of you who are not Christians, just notice this is written from a Christian worldview. If that's not your flavor, you can just read past that. The information here, though, is good, and just it's good material. I think it creates a nice, simplified way to walk through this, especially early on in therapy. Sometimes, I know for me, it was helpful to know, wow, okay, so I'm not a whack job. This is actually a thing.
Amen there.
So, yeah. So, thank y'all for the comments.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Let me see if I missed any questions. I don't know if there's any questions. There's a lot of comments. Yeah. So, if no one's got a question, just want to say thank you again for everybody watching. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the engagement. It's much appreciated. It's nice to know these things help. I know tonight's talk was a heavy one. But no, there's empathy and compassion coming from us. And this is a healable road. Yeah. And next week we start that healable road and what that looks like. We're going to talk about secure attachment. And if you're going, well, I was one of the other three, guess what? That's okay, because you can still get earned secure attachment. So the show's not over. Healing is possible. Look at me. I got married, for Pete's sake. So if I can do it. Oh, Danielle's got a question. Fire. Hang on.
Our cats haven't jumped on the desks yet. This is pretty impressive.
All right. So Danielle wrote, I used to think I was anxious, ambivalent, but listening to this, I identify more disorganized. Are there, she said, she corrected it in another comment.
Okay.
Are there similarities between the two?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would go back, Danielle, awesome question. And it's going back to kind of what I said too, is that to remember, and again, I'm a food guy. And Danielle, you're a food person. You're an executive chef. So this will help you. This is like a combo platter. And again, this is where the inner Justin comes out of food. But this is a combo platter deal where all of them are present. It's just think about portions of like which the mac and cheese, the potatoes, the barbecue food, and let's say collard greens. You know, attach an attachment style to each of those sides. Now, maybe your mac and cheese section is bigger, and that's the ambivalent. And your collard greens is smaller, and that's your disorganized. And maybe the barbecue chicken, smoked chicken, is, you know, again, you walk through this, but the portion sizes. So we are a mix. So it's okay to connect to multiple. I would say the key is to remember it's winnable, and it's healable, and it's changeable.
Yep.
That was my big question. I walked through the door of one of our professors, practically kicked the door down. Those of you who know me, I looked at him. I said, here's the situation. Here's what I've discovered. I just need to know, is this a winnable thing, or am I just going to keep smashing my head against the wall? He laughed. He said, Justin, here's what I'm going to tell you. It is winnable, but you're going to have to give it 2 years. And there's no guarantees that it's going to, quote unquote, work out. Mm-hmm. But give it 2 years to challenge and work through and go through this process. And that's what you have to do. But all I needed in my head was to know it was winnable. Because I don't want to show up to a game that's like, well, it doesn't matter what I do here because I can't win. It's going to be 60-0 in the fourth quarter. I want to know that when there's 2 minutes left in the game, I got the ball, there's a chance for us to win. Mm-hmm. And when he told me that, I said, awesome, I'll go do this because I'm tired. I literally ended up in the behavior ward at a hospital for 4.5 days because this stuff drove me so in a bad place that was where I ended up.
Yeah.
And yes, Danielle, you can have more than one. You can have a little of, yes, exactly. Yep.
A little of all of them. Even secure is on there too. And again, even though we've only talked about the insecure types of attachment, we all also have a little bit of secure attachment, whether it was that one person in your childhood that showed you that love and that care. Maybe it was that teacher.
Or that cool aunt.
Or that coach that you're like, yeah, like this was a great person in my childhood. That would have been an example of secure attachment. And so even if on your combo platter, that's like the veggie side and everything else is a lot bigger, it's still there.
Still there.
And we can grow that and keep going back to that example and use that for healing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And just know this is a process. I'm 34. I'll be 35 in December. Yep. You know, if I've had started therapy, I was 29. So about 6 years is a journey. Mm-hmm. You know, I had 29 years of this adventure of things not being quote unquote secure. We'll say that. So even though there's been 6 years of change and growth and incremental growth, it's to remember this is a journey that takes time. Changing your attachment style is one of the toughest things to do in therapy, and it's one of the slower things because it's literally a core level adjustment. There's literally genes that get changed, and we won't get into all this, but therapy they found can change genes, which is really cool. But this is a slow process. I tell people, and I think Kaylin's the same, therapy with me is a year or 2 years. It's just part of that relational pattern changing. Yep. So why don't you do our show tonight, Kaylin?
I was going to say, and just real quick though, the attachment, this is how you survived. So it's easy to get frustrated and upset when we look at, okay, well, I didn't want to respond that way, or I don't want ambivalent or avoidant or disorganized attachment. But this is how you survived. Our brains are so creative and they're quickly learning and adapting to different situations. And so we don't want to shame the survival techniques. And then we also don't want to suddenly expect our brains just to be okay, losing them in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. It's a slow adjustment to realize, okay, I can engage with someone in a new way, in a more secure way, and it won't end in disaster. And I can survive that. And it's kind of like those old scales you used to see centuries ago where it was like one side, you weight this side or weight this side. And with many of us, we have so many moments where it proves that insecure attachment. But the more experiential moments you get that are new, that prove secure attachment, that side gets heavier and heavier. And then you have more memories and more experiences to choose from. And that's what we're doing. And especially in therapy, that's what we really push is how can you now gain these new experiential memories? And how does therapy actually provide that? Mm-hmm. So, guys, that is our show tonight.
Yeah. Thank you again for everybody. Again, Danielle, Nikki, Ermi, Teresa. Make sure I get everybody. Yeah. just thank you again for everybody chiming in, dropping us a comment, a like. Feel free to share this. That's cool.
Yeah.
And we'll catch y'all next week, 7:30 next Wednesday. We're talking about secure/unsecure attachment. And maybe the next week we'll talk about attachment and sex, because people like talking about sex, right?
And it applies.
Very much. All right, y'all. We'll see you.
Bye.